Hello children, this is Manikshas. My dear children, today I shall explain to you in details that why the different social groups who participated the civil disobedience movements or how they saw the civil disobedience movements. What was their ideals and what Swaraj meant to them and why did they join the civil disobedience movements. All these concepts we shall be learning in details. So my dear children, here in the countrysides there are so many rich peasants who were facing lot of difficulties after the First World War. So dear children, here we see in the countrysides the rich peasants like Patidar of Gujarat, the Jats of Uttar Pradesh. They are the producers of commercial crops, but after the First World War they were greatly heated by the trade depressions, and due to that the falling prices was going down and down. So my dear children, in my previous videos lectures I have explained to you in details that the First World War, which created lot of economical devastations in all over the nations, and India was also having great financial difficulties. In my previous videos lectures I have explained to you that during the First World War it created economic devastations in Indian society, because during that time the Indian society was going through very hard time. There was epidemic, there was crop failure, there was increasing of price rate, there was forcefully soldier recruitment. So all these situations was there during the time of First World War. So here we understand that the rich peasants during the time of First World War having great difficulties to pay the revenue. Why? Because they do not have the income. Their income had been disappeared. Their trade activities had been greatly heated. They have the great difficulties to pay the high revenue, and during that time they are joining the hands together and they are involving in the civil disobedience movements. And for them, what Swaraj is? For them, Swaraj means to reduce the high revenue, because these rich peasants are having great difficulties because their crop is failure, their commercial crop is failure, their business activities is completely failure, so they have great difficulties to pay the high revenue. That is the reason these rich peasants are joining the hands with the freedom fighters and they are fighting for reducing the high revenue. So my dear children, when Gandhiji called off the civil disobedience movements in 1931, because the movement was getting very violent, and during that time these rich peasants was very disappointed. And why they were very disappointed? Because without revising the high revenue, the movement was called up, the movement was stopped. That is the reason the rich peasants were having great difficulties. And when the civil disobedience movement was relaunched in 1932, these peasant communities were not at all willing to participate in. Why? What was the reasons? The reasons is when Gandhiji called off the civil disobedience movement in 1931 without revising the revenue rates, during that time it causes great painful to the rich communities, and that is the reasons when the movement was relaunched they were not at all willing to participate in the movement. So dear children, as we are talking about the involvement of the different social groups in the civil disobedience movements, and one among them are the poor peasants. So already I have told you about the rich peasants who are facing lot of difficulties during the First World War because their income were disappeared and they were having great difficulties to pay the high revenue. And now we shall discuss about the poor peasantry. And the poor peasantry were having a small pieces of lands. They have taken it from the landlords. And due to this economic depressions here, the small peasants were also having great difficulties to pay the revenue, pay the rent. So dear children, here, this First World War, it not only created lot of devastations among the rich peasants, but also it had created lot of difficulties for the peoples of poor peasants also. Here the poor peasants who are not able to pay their high rent, and that is the reasons they are involving in the civil disobedience movement so that their high rent could be released here, so that their high rent could be unpaid here, and that is the reasons they are involving in the civil disobedience movements. So apart from that, my dear children, in many places the Congress leaders, they were unwilling to raise these issues in many places because they were thinking that it might hurt the rich peasants as well as the landlords, and that is the reasons they were not openly raising the issues in most of the places. And apart from that, my dear children, we have another topic, and what is that? The Indian merchant as well as the industrialist. Here the Indian merchant as well as the industrialists are also facing lot of difficulties after the First World War, because here the Indian industrialists as well as the merchants, they had huge profits during the First World War because they got orders during the time of First World War. They made more profits, huge profits, and they wanted to expand their business activities. But the colonial policies, the restrictions on business activities, which never allowed them to flourish their business activities in the society, and that is the reasons they joined their hands together in the civil disobedience movement so that there should be a liberal British policies which would allow them to flourish their commercial activities. And here, my dear children, why did they reacted it? Why did they reacted? Because there was a colonial policies which restricted the business activities, and what they wanted to have here, they wanted to have the protections on imports of foreign goods, at the same time the rupee sterling on foreign exchange rates. So here the barrier was there, and what was the barrier? The colonial policy which is not at all suitable to them, and at the same time they wanted to have protections on imports of foreign goods, at the same time rupee sterling on foreign exchange rates. And these are the two difficulties the commercials peoples, they are such as the industrialists as well as the merchants were facing, and that is the reason they involved in the civil disobedience movement, because they wanted to have the liberal policies and they wanted to have a better protections on foreign goods as well as the rupee sterling, so that their business activities will flourish, their commercial activities will flourish, their trade activities will flourish. That is the reason these industrialists who formed the Commercial Congress in 1920, and after that we see the FICCI, and its full form is Federations of the Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And the most active leaders in this merchants as well as in this industrialists were G.D. Birla as well as the Purushottam Thakur. So here what the peoples are doing, what the commercial classes are doing, what these industrialists are doing, these peoples are actively participating in the civil disobedience movements because the colonial policy is not at all suitable to flourish their business activities. It is not at all effective because the colonial policy is not good. Here they wanted to have protections in the imports of foreign goods as well as the rupee sterling. Because of these two factors, their business activities were not at all flourished. So my dear children, what they did, they were having great involvement during the time of civil disobedience movements. And what did they do? They supported the civil disobedience movements because they wanted to have Swaraj in the society, so that their business activities will flourish, their commercial activities will flourish, and that is the reasons, my dear children, they were involving in the civil disobedience movements. So dear children, when Gandhiji returned from the second round table conference, he was very disappointed because Gandhiji understood that the colonial government had taken a new measure to repress the nationalism movements in Indian society. But after the failure of the round table conference, here the business groups were also very disappointed. They were very disappointed and they were no longer having enthusiastic because they were saying that this colonial policy is very strict and it will not allow them to flourish their business activities. So they were thinking that after the round table conference there will be changes in policy, but when Gandhiji returned to India with great disappointment, they were understood that it is the failure, and they understood that they are no longer going to have the participations because the demands had not been fulfilled. So my dear children, here another groups, we see the industrial worker. The industrial worker were also participated in the civil disobedience movements, but not in large groups. Why did they participate in the civil disobedience movements? Because their working conditions was very poor. Their wages was very lower. Due to that, the industrial worker too also participated in the civil disobedience movement. Apart from that, we see the railway worker in 1930. The railway worker as well as the mines worker, they also participated in the civil disobedience movements because they were thinking that it is part of their struggles. So what they did was they wore the Gandhi capes, participated in rallies, and they started boycotting the campaign. So my dear children, here they involved in the boycotting of campaigns also. Apart from that, we see the involvement of the women who were actively participating in civil disobedience movements. Most of the high caste women were involved in the civil disobedience movements. Those parents who were rich, they were only allow their daughters as well as their women to be involved in the civil disobedience movements. So we see the rich women who had actively participated in the civil disobedience movement. So during the time of this Salt March, we noticed that thousands of women, they came out from their homes, they listened to the lectures of Mahatma Gandhi, they understood the ideas of Swaraj, and after understanding the ideas of Swaraj, they also participated in protesting the marches, manufactured salt, picked foreign cloth, liquor shops. At the same time, they sacrificed their lives, and many of the women, they went to jail. So my dear children, here the educated women, they were thinking that giving service to the nations is the prior duty of every human being. And that is the reasons they came out from their homes, sacrificing their lives, and they participated in the movement. They started protesting against different kind of policy of the British government. They went to jail. They encouraged people not to use the foreign clothes, picketed the liquor shops. So we see the involvement of the women during the time of civil disobedience movements. So my dear children, Gandhiji had understood that the duties as well as the responsibility of the woman is to look after the home, to take care of the family. So in spite of that also, the women who were having great involvement during the time of civil disobedience movements. So my dear children, in my today's video's lecture, I have explained to you in details that how the different social groups, they saw the civil disobedience movement. And here, different kind of social groups, they are participating in the civil disobedience movement with having different kind of ideas, with having different kind of aspirations, with having different kind of interest, and having such kind of ideals, they are participating in the civil disobedience movement. So my dear children, thank you so much for listening to me.